In this episode, I'm going to talk about two great tastes that taste great together. That's right, G.I. Joe and spooky stuff. So, stick around. Hello and welcome to Days of Dorker Pass. My name's Rob, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about 10 times the G.I. Joe toy line branched into the supernatural. Now, some of these might be a reach, and they might not be fan favorites, but it doesn't matter. They're cool because they take on the monster culture. Now, it took until about 1986 until G.I. Joe went from semi-normal to super science to downright supernatural. So it was a 4-year span there until they started dipping their toe into the freaky water. Now, number one is the Bats. Battle Android Troopers. These were Cobra's killer robots, if you will. And nothing says classic horror movies than a killer robot. Now, the Bats weren't the best on the battlefield. The toy was awesome, but the file card states that they don't care who they go after on the battlefield. So Cobra utilized them more as a retreat tactic, where they would flood the battlefield with these robots and then the humans would beat feet off the battlefield. Now, these figures had an awesome hologram chest plate that gave the impression of gears and diodes and, a whole bunch of science-y mechanical stuff going on. They all had arms or hands that you could pop off, and you had a claw, a normal hand that could hold the gun, a laser gun, and a blowtorch. Now, like I said, killer robots on the battlefield, that's a horror staple. It's a sci-fi staple. But when they arrived in 1986, we hadn't seen anything like that. We were dealing more with just typical or not so typical super science soldier kind of stuff. Heroes and villains. So 86, I think, was a tipping point. Not just for the Bat, but for a couple more that make the list. Now, number 2 on the list, in no particular order, is Crystal Ball. Now, I know not a lot of people dig him, but his file card says he is a 7th son of a 7th son and possesses supernatural abilities like reading minds. Cobra utilized him as an interrogator because he could tap into old gypsy magic and pull the information out of Joe's or anyone else's brain. Now, the spooky hills of Romania, another typical, awesome horror movie trope as far back as time. I mean, old black and white movies with heavy fog over the ground, some rickety old trees and a mountain in the background. Just add some horses and a covered wagon type of thing going through the twisty turns of the mountain, and Crystal Ball would fit right in. Now, number 3 is 2 different characters that kind of share the same niche, if you will. And that's Croc Master and Raptor. Now, Croc Master, everyone loves. Raptor, everybody hates. I always thought he was cool, but his background's a little weird, that he was like a tax accountant that just really loved birds, and Cobra hired him. But these are 2 people that master killer animals. I mean, we have horror movies like Alligator, where giant alligator comes out of the sewer and eats people. Croc Master was doing that on Cobra Island. I mean, the toy was awesome because you had Croc Master, who's a great design with his black mask, red eyes, breathing tube, and he had a leash that he could lead an alligator around with to eat people. But then you have Raptor, who controlled, birds of prey. Not control, but train birds of prey to attack people. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. That's it right there. Now, yes, he was a cheesy character, but as far as horror movies and spooky stuff goes, nothing scarier than a flock of hawks coming down to peck your eyes out and to claw your face. Now, number 4 branches on the spooky, the supernatural, the monstrous, but it was a true cash grab in the last year of the original Joes in 1994, when, to try to jump in on some of that Jurassic Park money, they had the Dino Hunters. Now, the set that I'm talking about was a Toys R Us exclusive that came with Ambush and Lowlight. They came with a Jeep and a giant T-Rex. Now, nothing says jumping the shark like throwing some dinosaurs in. But 94 was the swan song of the original line, and oddly enough, it's the year that produced the most figures and the most subsets. Because I think they were just throwing as many darts as they could at the dartboard to see what would stick. But dinosaurs, another horror staple, sci-fi staple, as far as cinema goes back. Now, number 5 are the Toxo Zombies. Now, Cobra, during the last years, because the Toxo Zombie came out in 92. Cobra is just trying anything. So, toxic waste, let's do it. It came with sprayers, little pumps, shoot water, toxic waste, whatever around. But what's really creepy about the Toxo Zombies is what the FOD car says. Excuse me, I have a cold, it's the fall, and my sinuses are crushed, so bear with me here. But, as the FOD card states, this is the final assignment for a full-term enlisted Toxo Viper. Now, these guys were mutated into zombies, and I quote, "not quite among the living, but not deceased enough to rot away." That's pretty morbid stuff for G.I. Joe back in the day. Now, technicolor, neon, whatever aside, that's some creepy stuff. I mean, the dude's missing a boot, and he's got ripped up lesioned leg hanging out, missing a glove with a ripped up hand, helmet cracked in half with some gnarly undead zombie face peeking out. That's pretty messed up. Now, number 6 is Dr. Mindbender. Also released in 86, when I think the tipping point started going towards the weird in G.I. Joe. And Dr. Mindbender became your typical mad scientist. Now, he originally was an orthodontist that was a kind and caring, honest man that experimented on, let me get this right here, brainwave stimulation to help put his patients at ease and to alleviate pain while he was working on their teeth. Now, with no one else to experiment it on, he used himself. And through a tragic mishap, it made him the Dr. Mindbender that we know and love today. It made him go evil, calculating, just a bad dude. Now, as I said, he fit the niche of the mad scientist for Cobra. Anything that was weird and had some DNA or technical know-how attached, he worked on it. His name appears on a lot of people's file cards from here on out. Also in the comics, and the TV show, even though he was used for a lot of comic relief, but he was a pretty formidable foe in the comics and in the toys. Now, number 7 is Also something from '94, and yeah, like I said, Hasbro was just throwing every dart they had to see if it would stick. And they went with something called Star Brigade, which would be cool. But they introduced aliens into the G.I. Joe toy universe. You had three of them: Carcass, Lobo Tomax, and Predacon, which we also know popped up in Transformers as well. Now, these guys were all mercenaries, bounty hunters, trackers, and they're all evil dudes that, you know, their file cards state that they would, go into alien towns and just crush everybody. But they were neat figures. I mean, they all, except the Predacon, had a bendy feature. Carcass had bendy arms, and he had a thing in his chest that could grab. Little thing. Lobo Tomax had a big bendy head, multiple legs, and a bendy tail. Now, the Predacon, I think, was the coolest. He had four arms, which was a sculpt that we never had seen with a G.I. Joe figure before. Great colors, his blue shading, and I mean, these are figures that I hope to one day have in my collection. They're just so weird and just so, excuse the pun, alien for the G.I. Joe line. Now, number 8 is the Cobra La team. These were three figures. You had Globulus, Nemesis Enforcer, and the Royal Guard. Now, this was a big departure from the G.I. Joe we knew and love. And of course, we saw a lot of these guys in G.I. Joe the movie. Now, I think the adventures I concocted for these dudes were a little bit cooler than what the movie had in it, but the movie had some neat stuff. In the Cobra La city hidden in the Himalayas, these dudes employed prehistoric crustaceans, to be their beasts of burden. They even had them as armor. And it has a very Cthulhu-esque tone to it, because they talk about the ancient serpent kings and how Globulus is descended from them and he's thousands of years old. And over the years he would replace his parts with bio-organic parts. That's why he has the green hand and the snake body. Nemesis Enforcer, very great backstory. They say he was a soulless creature created from a pile of dead things. And he would silently fly through the night. And when villagers back in the day would catch glimpses of him, that's where the myths of vampires or harpies or any other winged creatures had come from. Now, that being said, they say he started these myths. So, are they saying there's no vampires and stuff within the toy line at least? I know the cartoon really did some crazy stuff with monsters and old gods and stuff like that. But the toy line was a separate thing. And like I said, it started off normal and then quickly got a little nuts. Which is where we get a lot of these dudes on the list. Oh, and before I forget, the Royal Guard were bred and augmented to be these brainless killers, pretty much. They protected the royal family of Globulus and stuff, but the file card states that they can't really make decisions on their own. But it's a great figure. The package art for it, awesome. Pretty cool in the movie. Now, number 9 on the list is another two of them. And this came from the Mighty Marines, or whatever the offshoot was called from the G.I. Joe line. But this is the Monstro Viper and the Bio Viper. They were both released in 1993. And they were bigger, bulkier figures. I'm sure you'll see the pictures. But we'll start with the Bio Viper. with his tendrils, and very neat design. Again, a far departure from the G.I. Joe we know and love. And these dudes were once eels that Dr. Mindbender tweaked their DNA and spliced it with a menagerie of deadly sea life. Different octopi, squids, sharks, what have you, to get these great underwater killers on the Cobra forces. Now, the Monstro Viper, this is where I call out the about Nemesis Enforcer with the stories of vampires and stuff. And this is paraphrasing, but the Monstro Vipers were once range vipers, that their DNA were crossed with rabid werewolves, Bigfoot, and grizzly bears. Now, the toy also came with Play-Doh, and you could lift up the front chest piece of it and put the Play-Doh in, and it would mold what they called the gut bomb. So you have a rabid Bigfoot werewolf grizzly bear dude dropping gut bombs on G.I. Joe. Kinda neat, but a far departure. Now for an honorable mention, and that would be the G.I. Joe Adventure Team from 1970 to 1974. Now these were the 12-inch line, and this is when it started making its swan song. Why it gets an honorable mention were some of the adventure packs. I mean, G.I. Joe in this incarnation fought everything from abominable snowmen, sharks, squids, tigers, pygmy gorillas. Was that a thing? Giant snakes, mummies, and even, again, a hammerhead stingray? Is that a thing? Anyway, Adventure Team were some of the first monster hunters within the G.I. Joe line. And I think the Adventure Team was a huge inspiration when it came to the 80s line, when it came to stepping out of the bounds of reality, because the G.I. Joe figures before that were just your typical branches of the military with different play sets and different accessories and add-ons. So this took the line in a whole new direction, which I think was, like I said, part of the inspiration for the 80s toy line. Now number 10 on the list, in no particular order, is Serpentor. This guy is a DNA Frankenstein monster created by Dr. Mindbender and, as he's called on the file card, Interrogator? Him and Destro with the Cobra Brain Trust created Serpentor. And they used the DNA from Napoleon, Caesar, Hannibal, and Attila the Hun. Now one of the cool things of Serpentor in the comics was him remembering his past lives and how those played into the story, played into his decisions as a leader. And the cartoon didn't really get into that, and when they attached him to the Cobra La thing, it kind of destroyed the neat mythos that the toy and the comic book had. Also an interesting fact from the comic book, he also had DNA from Storm Shadow thrown in, because Destro killed Storm Shadow for being a traitor with his working with Snake Eyes and kind of being a fringe player, and they threw him in one of the tanks, and he also is part of the mess of Serpentor. Now anyway, that was a super quick 10 times the G.I. Joe toy line got a little spooky, a little monstrous, and a little weird. So until next time, my name's Rob. This has been Days of Dorker Past. Oh! Shameless plug time. If you like G.I. Joe and are down with the originals, check out my t-shirt at TeePublic. Just type in My Side of the Laundry Room to find the store. See you next time. Peace!